Hello, everyone, and welcome to last week's recording of Meet the Explorers, hosted by the Tech Interactive as part of our annual Earth Day celebration. My name is Isabella Correa, and I am a junior at Presentation High School and the Tech Student Board's co-president. I had the privilege of moderating this session alongside Kavita Gupta, a Bay Area educator and advisor to our Tech Student Board. Our National Geographic explorers shared lessons and highlights throughout their career, as well as ways for us to get involved in meaningful work while sheltering in place. Our Nat Geo Explorer guests included Anika Ullah, a Fulbright scholar and current graduate student at MIT, and Dr. Dan Hammer, an environmental data scientist and founder of Earthrise Media. I'm sure after hearing their stories, you too will be inspired to pursue your interests and you'll be equipped with tips for helping the planet. Before I begin and introduce Anika Ullah, I'd like to acknowledge the entire Tech Student Board for planning this session as part of our annual Youth Climate Action Summit, presented by NetApp. The Tech Student Board is an arm of Tech for Global Good, which is a tech interactive program designed to create changemakers who will tackle our planet's toughest challenges. I'd like to thank our sponsors, supporters, and all of you for joining us today.
So hi everyone, my name is Anika Ullah. Thank you so much, Kavita, for that wonderful introduction. So today I want to talk a little bit about my journey to becoming a National Geographic explorer and my path there. So growing up in middle school and high school, I always was torn between the arts and sciences. I'm a first generation Bangladeshi American and child of war refugees. And so I knew that I always wanted to do something with my life that could empower people in more vulnerable situations than myself. Now I'm 24 years old and I'm a scientist, an artist, technologist, activist, Fulbright scholar, currently at school at MIT, an aspiring humanitarian doctor, and a Nat Geo explorer. So before I start, I want to quickly talk about what I even mean when I say the environment, because I remember for me growing up, the environment always felt like something I could see, but conceptually was pretty abstract. And it wasn't until later that I really understood how much our lives depend upon the environment. So it's the air we breathe, it shapes the food that we eat, our economy, it's the place that we build our homes, and even a lot of our medicines actually come from the environment. Furthermore, I remember thinking that the environment was its own academic field, like you would have to go and study environmental sciences and that was your only way of doing it. But what I've found throughout my years is that it actually intersects with many other fields ranging from human rights to human health, migration, and food justice. And I'd say the aspect of the environment that really catalyzed me to begin my work was the concept of environmental justice, which is basically the idea that certain environmental harms impact vulnerable communities more. So one example is during the COVID outbreak right now, a lot of Native American communities in the US have had limited access to water. So I quickly want to walk everyone through a project that I'm working on right now on climate change in coastal Bangladesh. And I think what's really interesting about this project is that it really shows how the environment is not just about its objective impacts on land, but how it intersects with people and their livelihoods. So Bangladesh is one of the most vulnerable countries to climate change. And the reason why is if you look at the picture in the upper right-hand corner, that's one of the biggest tidal regions in the world. And so it's effectively a constant flux between water and sea. And so with rising sea levels and increasing glacial melt from the Himalayas, it's projected that by 2050, a lot of this land is going to be flooded. And so I think what's really important to note here is that what this land being flooded actually causes a whole slew of a lot of different really negative things that might happen. So for example, most of Bangladesh is a country that eats rice. And it turns out that most of the rice is planted in this region. And so we're worried that if that land is flooded with seawater, which is really salty, it might cause issues with food security because there wouldn't be enough rice that grows. Another thing I want to point out is at the bottom of the screen, there's a woman, and she is an environmental refugee. And so another way that climate change is connected to people is that this influx of water is causing migration and causing especially women and children who live there to need to move away and find another place to go. So now I want to talk about what we're doing to work on this project. So this is a really exciting new project we're working on, and I'm working with Ufu, my friends Ufu and Hannah, who are also at MIT. And what we're basically doing is we're using aerospace data from satellites and artificial intelligence to evaluate these new climate change adaptation strategies. So on the bottom of the screen, I have a few different blocks, and those are sustainable development goals from the United Nations. And so again, I really want to highlight how, you know, no matter what your field of interest is, whether it's going into industry, food justice, public health, social justice, really whatever it is, it really does intersect with climate change in many ways. And so one exciting thing that we're thinking about is, like I mentioned, using satellite data, where you could basically get information every day about how changing certain things about the land is going to impact the amount of water that floods in there within maybe the next year or the next few years. Another interesting tool that we have in our toolkit is biotechnology. So a lot of scientists are thinking about, you know, what if we can use new tools in gene editing to make plants that are more resistant to climate change or more resistant to drought or to waterlogged conditions. And this is really cool because it meets goal number 9, which is industry and innovation, because it's a new technology, and number 2, because if you were able to make a crop that could grow in these waterlogged conditions, you would be helping fight hunger. So now I just really briefly want to show you a few other ways in which I've tackled health and environmental justice through my work. And so as an artist, I'm also really interested in using documentary film. And so while I was in university, I made a documentary film about how cars idling at the US-Mexico border was linked to air pollution and respiratory health for immigrants. And here's just a quick snapshot of all the different places in the world that my work has taken me. I've been to Taiwan, I've worked with indigenous groups in New Zealand, in South Asia, and I'm really excited to learn more. So the main thing that I want to share that I think would have been helpful for me to know when I'm younger is that I think no matter what discipline you're interested in, there's a way that it fits in with the environment. And I think the only way that we can help create a better and more sustainable future is if we are optimistic and we can imagine new ways of change making. Thank you.
Wow, Anika, that was an amazing presentation. I was always inspired by you, but now I'm just blown away. Wow, from artificial intelligence to using this large data to creating drought-resistant plan and all of those. So my question to you is, a lot of our viewers or attendees today are middle school and high school students. So if you had 1 minute to talk to Anika in middle school or Anika in high school, what would you tell that Anika?
That's a great question. So I would tell myself to keep up my interests in whatever my interests were. I feel like one of the biggest struggles I had faced in middle and high school was that I think especially in the Bay Area, things are very STEM focused. And, you know, I love STEM, but at the same time, sometimes I felt this pressure of, you know, I'm a woman of color in STEM and I need to do that. But I think ultimately what felt most satisfying for me was finding a way to synthesize my love for the arts and for activism with science. And so, you know, for some of you, that might be your love for music or for cooking or animation. And I really encourage you to, you know, foster your interests in whatever it is that you have. And I find that, you know, in the long term, if you think creatively, there are ways to use your skills, whatever they are, to address the big problems that are affecting humanity today.
Wow, Anika, that's a great advice to live a life of passion. Don't worry about things. Sometimes we try and customize too much. Amazing. I hope our attendees will keep your lesson close to their heart. Thank you. And now I would like to invite Isabella to introduce Dan, and let's hear his presentation.
Hi, everyone. My name is Isabella. I'm the co-president of the Tech Student Board, and I'm super interested in STEM and leadership, so I'm super excited to introduce Dan Hammer from Earthrise Alliance. He's a data scientist, and take it away, Dan.
Great. Let me get on this tech. One moment. All right. Are you able to see my screen? Great. So my name is Dan Hammer, and I am a data scientist. And I can say that without worrying too much about it because no one really knows what that means. I don't even really know what that means. But at its core, it's finding and communicating patterns from within data. And my special niche is environmental data. I've had the opportunity to work at some pretty amazing places. I've worked in the Obama White House as a senior policy advisor for data infrastructure, at NASA as a presidential innovation fellow, building out their web services, because it turns out that NASA is really great at sending things to the moon, but not so great at the internet. And so I was there helping to fix that. And now I am the director of Earthrise Media, which is a nonprofit dedicated to making environmental information much, much more accessible to many more people, as well as a senior advisor at Google X for their environmental projects. I got my start building something called Global Forest Watch, which tracks deforestation from satellite imagery. This is what it looks like. It was a long slog, started in 2008 and released in 2014. But what it does is it takes free and openly accessible information from the European Space Agency and NASA and converts it into something that many more people can understand, not just this esoteric data source that's mainly reserved for military analysts, but rather something that policymakers and activists and scientists can use, which is just where on Earth are forests being lost. Through that process, I was tracking early on. I've been tracking the usage of that website. So what you see here, it's a graph of the daily number of people that have watched or viewed something on Global Forest Watch's site. And usually around 1,500 people per day come to the site. But that steady beat is punctuated by these large spikes. And those large spikes correspond to when the data from Global Forest Watch was used to tell a story by a journalist, by an activist, or by a scientist. And so, for example, that the big one came out when there was a New York Times article that referenced heavily the Global Forest Watch data. And so, with the mission of trying to get many more people to use and make sense of information about our planet Earth, I dedicated the last year and a half to helping journalists tell stories with satellite imagery. And this varies from environmental events like the melting of glaciers and the way in which that affects downstream runoff in Canada, which is the screen on the left, or even the building of these detention centers in northern China for the Muslim minority, the Uyghur, where the Chinese government says they're not doing something, but we can just look at the images and say, yeah, you are. We can see you doing it. You're not doing a very good job hiding it either. So we've been working with professional journalists for a really long time, but it turns out the same sort of technology that we have built for professional journalists can be used for students. And so the main product of this new nonprofit, relatively new nonprofit called Earthrise Media is a tool that will be released in the next 2 weeks for classrooms to be able to interact with satellite imagery, natural and social sciences. Our first trial was with the 9th grade world history classroom in Weston, Massachusetts, also by a National Geographic educator classroom. And they were able to identify new and previously undiscovered illegal gold mines in the Amazon. And those results will be published in Reuters. So the idea that this data can be used and processed by not just military analysts or professional reporters, but also students to break news about the changing conditions on our planet Earth It was really powerful. We're trying to put that into many, many more people's hands. And so I was asked by the student group to talk about ways in which suggestions that I would make to you guys. And I just calculated that I have been out of high school longer than most people in high school have been alive, which was a wake-up call for me. And so my experience won't be as relevant as I would have hoped. A lot of things have changed, but the one thing that I will say is that instead of trying to pick up a skill, choosing a skill like coding or data science or something like that, pick a project and implement that project that you care about. So for example, and one that I would suggest for you guys is if you're at home and you're reading something in the news that you think can be materially enhanced with satellite imagery or visualized with satellite imagery, go to Google Earth, find that place and watch it change over time. And if it's something interesting, or even if it's not something interesting, send me a note, because it might well be our next investigation on our platform. But thanks very much.
Thank you so much for that awesome presentation, Dan. So I have a question for you as well. So think back to when you were in high school, and did you picture yourself getting into this type of career? And if not, like, what kind of path did you take to get to this point in your career? And have you liked having this variety in different positions and careers?
Yeah, that's a good question too. I definitely didn't think that I would be a data scientist, because I didn't know what that was. I still don't really know what that is. I thought that I was going to be a professor. My dad's a professor, and I just figured, well, I should be like him. And I started out at this economic think tank right out of college, and one of my mentors said, you know what you need before going to graduate school? You need to learn how to code and do more statistics. And I really took that to heart. And I learned how to do those things through that Global Forest Watch project. And I had never taken a computer science course. And in fact, it was pretty intimidating in college to do so. But I really wanted to find out where deforestation was happening on the Earth's surface. So I spent a really long time trying to do that. It turns out it's a lot of information. You need to know how to code to do that. And so that was some of the best advice that I had ever heard, which was just like pick up skills through something you care about. And that's what led to me being a data scientist today.
Well, that's excellent advice. Thank you. So now I'm going to direct to the audience. So we're going to let you guys choose what the next question you want to be. And Kelly is going to screen share a poll. So you can, it'll appear right on your screen as a poll, and you can just choose which question you want. Okay, it looks like it's going to be our first question. So this is directed to both Anika and Dan. So everyone wants to know, what are some uncommon fields/topics for environmental good that people can pursue at home?
Sure, I can start off. Hi, so let's see. I think what could be really interesting to look into is a lot of people don't realize that there are a lot of communities around the world who have been fighting for environmental justice for a very long time. And a lot of these people are indigenous peoples around the world. And so I would really suggest looking into indigenous knowledge and movements about protecting the environment. You could start by looking at the same indigenous nations that were facing the water crisis, and no DAPL. So I think that's one thing to look at. I think something else that is really interesting is looking at climate change resilience in small island nations. So what this means is that there's a lot of small islands around the world, and they've been facing the impacts of climate change, or they've been feeling them a lot earlier than a lot of other places in the world have. And so they actually have a lot of experience in trying different low-cost strategies of mitigating it. So I think that could also be interesting. Something that's a little more complex to talk about and think about, but I think is really important, is thinking about how the economy and different political systems, whether it's capitalism or socialism or whatever, how these shape their relationship with the environment, and thinking about long-term if those relationships are sustainable.
My response will not be so inspired. I'm going to go back to data science because I graduated from the Berkeley Institute for Data Scientists, and I was the only person who seemed to care about the environment. Most people were cosmologists or neuroscientists, but there's a big role for people who want to work with information in a way to empower other people, like indigenous groups, to speak up for their natural environment. And so the type of data that I know best is satellite imagery, and it's widely accessible. You can get it through Google Earth, and so in this time where we're all supposed to be physically separated, this is also a way to connect with places out of the home through a computer. And so being able to track development near your local trails, or in Northern California, for example, we have watching the recovery from the 2018 wildfires. There's all sorts of interesting questions about environmental justice just by watching the progression of recovery in wealthier neighborhoods and not poorer neighborhoods, or recovery from hurricanes and tornadoes, or even man, there's all sorts of things that you can sort of watch and see with your own eyes about the way in which we are affecting the environment. And so I wouldn't necessarily focus myself on the fields or topics, but rather the methods of data collection and analysis, like satellite imagery.
Thanks, you two, for the great advice. Hopefully that inspired people to pursue different projects and different research opportunities here at home. So now we're going to move on to our success and failure and just personal learnings throughout your career. So Anika, you can go first. So can you explain one of your greatest career successes and how you've built on it?
Thank you. So I think my greatest career success was realizing that the most powerful thing I can do is not something that I do, but something that I enable other people to do. And so time and time again, this is something I've seen through my work. So for example, in my presentation, really quickly, I showed you all a documentary film I made in collaboration with immigrants living at the US-Mexico border. And what was a really exciting outcome from that is we basically came together around the film, showed it to the binational EPA between US and Mexico. And, you know, for me, as I had to leave university and go on to continue other parts of work, the community continued to have a way to dialogue with policymakers and continually talk about what they're facing and how things need to change. And so that really has been the most important thing that I've learned. And I remember I was at a National Geographic conference and I was talking to an explorer who was in his 90s, and he told me the same thing. He told me, you know, at the end of the day, the most powerful thing you can do is empower others. And so moving forward, whenever I design a new project, I try to think about, you know, how can I create tools that other people can keep using? Like, for example, Dan's work is really awesome because it's in line with that. But it can even be simpler in terms of how do you share certain education with different groups of people and make connections between people that will continue even after you leave.
That's an excellent response. Thank you. So Dan, would you like to answer the same question, please?
Sure. You know, I still don't quite know how to measure success appropriately for these big, I'm not after the big bucks here. And so it's hard for me to figure out how to measure success. But I can measure the way in which I treat other peoples on a day-to-day basis. And so I can sort of measure success on the day if I think that I've been kind to the people around me. I think that's probably, it's easy to get caught up in feeling like trying to figure out what you're supposed to do and work very, very hard and focus exclusively on what you yourself think you should be doing, but sort of look outward and just be kind to the people around you, especially when you're locked in a room with them right now. It would be good to be kind. This is served over and over again. I'm not sure exactly how or why I get the opportunities to work at some of these pretty amazing places, but I know that if I were mean to the people around me, I would not get those opportunities. So that's my answer.
No, that's excellent advice, and it's definitely applicable to right now. So now I'm going to turn it over to Kavita to ask the next question. Oh, you're on mute still, Kavita.
I need to figure this mute thing out. Okay, my next question to both of you is, maybe Anika can go first, followed by Dan, is what is one challenge you've overcome in your work, or what lesson in resiliency can you give to our attendees?
Good question. So I'm going to answer this in a very honest way, and it's that I think growing up in the Bay Area, we are very, very privileged in a lot of ways. And for me, it wasn't really until I had a chance to interact with people from really different and diverse communities that I was sort of able to open my eyes and see how much work we still have left to do in this world. And so I think in terms of resilience, so I remember when I was growing up, I feel like there was this narrative of, if you're from a community that's more privileged, you should be finding ways to help communities that are less privileged. But so, I spent a year living with this indigenous community in Taiwan for my Fulbright year. And what I learned is that it's not just a one-directional way of learning. I learned so much from them as well about things that I had no clue about. And so I think moving forward, just remembering that, every single person, no matter what age they are, where they're from, what their life experiences are, you have something to learn from them and they have something to learn from you. And so for me, I always try to ground it back in the people that I work with and think about everything as like a mutual exchange. What can I teach you? What can you teach me? And I found that, growing up, I sometimes felt really guilty. Like I had family members living in developing countries that were going through a lot more difficult things than I was here. But once I sort of shifted my mindset to thinking about it as a mutual exchange, I feel like that is what gave both me resilience in my own work, making sure that I'm not burned out, and other communities resilience, because again, I'm thinking about how to do work sustainably and enable each other to continue doing good work.
Wow, that's deep, Anika. That's very honest, very deep. And I know this mutual exchange will definitely a message that will resonate with so many of the attendees. So thank you. Dan?
I get rejected all the time. I mean, we were trying to figure this out. I'm working at this nonprofit where we rely on philanthropic grants, and we think that 9 out of the 10 applications that we submit are rejected. And so sometimes I'll get rejected for something that's very that's that's basically free, like free Amazon Web Service credits we'll get rejected for. And then we'll get, at the same time, in the same week, a massive prize that was totally unexpected. And so the idea being that just persistence through those rejections, like over and over again, and just to be doing good work all that time. If you're doing good, solid work, then on average these things will. No, that's not true. Most of the time, even on average, if you're doing good work, you'll get rejected. It seems like, but at least the average will be higher, and you'll be able to persist. So yeah, persistence, even in the face of rejection, just over and over and over again.
I'm sure they will remember and use it. I mean, 9 out of 10 rejections is a handful, Dan. Thank you for sharing that. So to everybody now, we are here today to celebrate 50th Earth Day. And we want to acknowledge that we are doing our best, given our situation right now, to show our solidarity for our planet and do whatever we can. And along that vein, the tech has created some challenges that you can go after attending this session and take these challenges from home. You will be hearing more about how you individually or in groups can do these challenges in the slides that are to follow after I'm done talking. So hold tight for those challenges. And I know that shelter in place can feel limiting. And I know that sometimes the students feel very small in big complex problems like climate change. So Anika and Dan, knowing that our youth is unstoppable, you can put them in shelter in place, but you can't keep them from doing good for the environment. What is that one advice you give them? Where can they start? They have some more time at hand, but they're confined at home. So what could they do to do right by the planet from shelter in place? Anika and then Dan.
Sure. So to begin, I think right now, what humanity is going through, this is going to change society in a lot of ways, and hopefully for the better, or not just hopefully, but if we spend this time rethinking a lot of the structures we have in place in our society, whether it's government, to economy, to the way that education is produced, I think that's really when we're able to be empowered to change things in the future. So something I've always been inspired by about you all, and my younger brothers in your generation as well. And it's just, I think your energy is really, really amazing. And I'm always surprised by how critically aware people in high school and middle school are already about a lot of the really complex things that are driving the status of our environment and global health today. So I would say, number one, maybe looking for people in your own generation who have already become these activists and started doing a lot of really intense education to each other, like through social media, for example, about, how did we as humans get to the point where we are today and what needs to change? And I think something as simple as starting conversations with your friends about this, I think all great change starts with, ideas and sharing those ideas with people that you respect and trust and that you're friends with. So that's number one, I've been also doing a lot of big time reading. In terms of more tangible steps that you can take besides from just reading and generally advancing your knowledge, I would say, as you're reading news, for example, about different community projects that are going on across the country to kind of mitigate COVID, if you're interested in the topic of COVID or whatever topic it is, you can directly email them and say like, hey, I'm in high school, I'm sheltered in place, but I'm really interested in what you all are doing right now. Is there any way that I can contribute? I'm interested in X, Y, and Z, and this is the part of your project that I thought was really interesting. And most organizations would be really excited to see a young person excited to work with them and help them in any way they can. And so I think really this is a way that you can get real world experience when you're still in your home, by helping cultivate your own skills as they apply to contemporary issues.
That is great advice, Anika. Very applicable, very easy. They can definitely do it from shelter in place. Thank you. Dan?
Well, I'm just gonna beat the same drum here, which is, I mean, because this is what I do every day, right here in this seat. I sit at my computer and I try to figure out ways to make satellite imagery more accessible, which is just all satellite imagery is low cost information that's credible and compelling about how the Earth is changing, that you can access right through, I mean, I would start with Google Earth. And it's incredibly powerful. I just read an article yesterday about the Ministry of Environment in Cambodia is taking legal action against environmental groups that use satellite imagery to track deforestation. That means it's incredibly powerful. And you guys have that ability to look at that same data that some officials, government officials, are very scared of. Similarly with the Chinese government, watching how these detention centers are growing. And it's not like once the story has been written, these events just stop. There's a lot of follow-up that can be done. So for example, to be able to measure the scale of recovery after the October 2018, I think, wildfires in Santa Rosa, to understand what the scale of that destruction looked like, and understanding what that means if there's many, many more wildfires in Northern California that would have the same impact, and how long it takes to recover. These are stories that aren't necessarily written, but that policymakers should know when making decisions about our natural environment. And so there's this incredibly powerful, a very abundant source of information that's largely untapped, that requires a human eye. This is not something that AI or machine learning will quickly take over. It does require human labeling and understanding and contextualization. And students can do that. Students are actually better, as we've seen in some of our initial trials, at doing the meticulous work to measure and understand change on the Earth's surface from satellite imagery. So I would just get started. I'd find something in the news about deforestation, about wildfire recovery, about drought, about snowpack. I go into Google Earth and measure it, and then email me.
Dan, that was really powerful. I always thought all this satellite data and imagery is really for sophisticated people. Thank you for making it so accessible and explaining it so easily for our high schoolers and middle schoolers. Appreciate that. And at this time, I would like to invite Erica to ask any questions that might have come from our attendees in the chat.
So as of now, we don't have any questions from the audience yet. Folks, if anything came up for you during the session so far, please throw it into the chat and we'll share it. Here we have some coming through already. I will pose one first for Dan and Anika around, you both have turned your projects, your passions into projects. And so I was wondering if you could speak to how you find an audience for that message, for those projects that you've created, either for getting feedback or finding collaborators or for people to take action.
Do you want me to go first? You've been going first quite a bit here. Okay, all right. I appreciate it. Now I have to think about things on the fly. So for an audience, again, I would just go back to persistence. So the time when we started Global Forest Watch, and by the time someone heard us enough to incorporate it into their work, specifically that was the World Resources Institute, was 5 years. So 5 years of beating on doors, trying to convince people that this is something worth taking a look at. It's not easy to get that audience. And it just took a lot of persistence and a lot of rejection. And then now, the idea of being able to be closer to a new source of information has made it much easier. The audience, we are trying to connect this low-cost source of information to people who already create content in command audience or professional reporters. And so the audience is sort of built into their profession. And so by leaning on information that is relevant and credible, it makes it a little bit easier to get that information out to many, many more people without having to justify it and bang on doors nearly as much.
Awesome. So for me, I think whenever I think of environmental issues, my brain tries to trace it back to people and communities and thinking about, what groups of people does this issue impact? And so that's probably my first, I don't even know if audience is the right word, but I mean, I think it's like this idea that there's already communities of people around the world who viscerally feel the impacts of these changes. And I think for me, it's more about thinking about who those groups of people might be, seeing what they've already been working on. That's another thing that I always like to remind myself, that if I've thought of an idea, there's just so many people on this planet that there's got to be someone else who's thought of it before me and who's already started working on it. And so, in the best way possible, where I think, okay, cool, I can reach out to them. I can see what they've been working on. I can see how I can bring my skills to support them. And I also really like thinking about transnational communities. So for example, if you take deforestation or climate change, we already know that coastal areas and small islands are right now they're facing the impacts of climate change and more severe impacts than other places. And so when I'm doing research, I think about, okay, what are a few coastal communities that might have been impacted in the past decade? Can I see what sorts of grassroots initiatives or what their government has been doing about it? And then is there ways that I can learn from those communities and connect them and see how we can all sort of share our strategies and learn from each other?
Great. Thank you both. We have questions that have come in, a number of them, so I'll start going through them and we'll see how many we can get through in our remaining time. We have interest from the audience of why you each chose your career path.
I'll go first. Career path. Wow. Well, again, the career. I was 2 years into graduate school when data science became a thing, and so I went to school for my graduate degrees in environmental economics, and I was focusing a lot on the methods, like moving data around and analyzing it. And it turned out that right in the middle of doing that, it got a name change, which was data science. And I just doubled down because it was it seemed like really all of a sudden the things that I was doing were not, I wouldn't say cool, but like cooler than they were with this name change. And so I sort of fell into it. I fell into it because of the things that I really liked doing, and have continued to do it ever since. The draw in Silicon Valley is towards tech. I definitely understand that, and tech to sell more things, and that's not totally fair, but the idea of using that tech for global good is also becoming cool, and maybe I'm just a trend. Who knows? I wear a hat since before it was cool. No one thinks it's cool when I was doing it, but now Ashton Kutcher started to do it, and then it became cool. That's probably even too early for TikTok. Oh man, I feel old. This spun off the rails. Anyway, I fell into it, and I love what I do, and I continue to do it.
And Anika, you can maybe address that, but we also had a question. People wanted to hear a little bit more about your work with the indigenous groups in Taiwan. So maybe you can do a tiny bit about career and then a little bit more about that.
Yeah, sounds good. So career. First, I want to obliterate this notion that we have one calling or one path. Because for me, like if you look at my experiences, I've literally been all over the place. In college, I studied human biology, I studied a little bit of computer science, I studied experimental art, I started a nonprofit and started getting into social activism. Right now, my master's is technically in media arts and technology, but I've been studying philosophy, economics, development. I've also been playing around with satellite technologies, AI. So, I mean, for me, I feel like my two driving things that I've always loved are, number one, I love learning from other people. I love other cultures. I love seeing colors and tastes and new sights and just new ways of thinking. It's just a passion of mine. And number two, I really love supporting other people in whatever way I can. And so for me as a kid, I always thought like, you know, I want to be a physician, and I still do. I'm actually applying to medical school this cycle as well. But, you know, for me, all of these things, I am going to be a doctor. I am going to be an activist. I'm also a singer. I'm working on putting out an album this year. And so, you know, I like to think of my life as like a lifelong journey of just playing and exploring and creating and trying to do good in creative ways. And I feel like once I started thinking about my life in this way, instead of like, what is my ultimate career, you know, where will I be, where will I settle, that sort of thing, I think it really liberated me to just explore what I want to explore. And now I can talk a little bit more about living with an Indigenous community in Taiwan. So you all should look into the Fulbright program, because I had no idea what it was until like 6 months before I applied. It's basically a really cool, you're kind of like a cultural diplomat from the US government, and you apply with a project idea to go anywhere in the world doing a project that's, you know, relevant to that community, and the US government basically funds you to go there for a year and to do your project. And so I will send my website out so you can take a look at it. I also have a TEDx talk talking about some of my work, and this is actually where I got my first Nat Geo grant. But basically, I was working on, there's this food called betel nut, which is like, it looks like a tiny coconut, and people chew it because it's a stimulant, but it also has a lot of culturally important practices and environmentally sustainable uses. And so this indigenous tribe called the Amis tribe in Taiwan, they have one of the longest histories of using betel nut in the world. And so I basically lived with them for a year because, number one, I wanted to understand their sort of like cultural practices and like environmental uses of betel nut. But, oh, right, I forgot the most important part. If you eat too much betel nut, you get oral cancer. And so I was always really interested in this clash between health, environment, and culture. And so living with them, I was able to learn a lot about how they have certain preparation strategies of betel nut that makes us less cancerous. And yeah, that's a very long project. So I'll leave my website in case anyone wants to check that out.
That's great. Thank you so much for that. I think we still have a lot more questions for Dan and Anika, and we weren't able to get to all of them. But we will share some of the resources that they have, their websites, links to more of their work. Dan, we had interest from folks on how can these students get access to some of the data sets. So we'll share that with folks in a follow-up email after this session. And Stephen, I'm gonna send it over to you.
Thank you so much, Erica. And I know that we're 2 minutes to 4, but please stay with us to the end. We have a lot of great ways that you can get involved to be good stewards of our earth. One of those ways is becoming a member of the Tech Student Board. We invite all high school juniors who are on the call to apply. Isabella, you and the rest of the Tech Student Board helped produce this wonderful production. Would you mind giving us a brief overview of your experience being part of this group?
Sure. So when I think of the board, I think of it as like the best thing that I've ever involved myself like throughout my high school experience. It's great to be working with like-minded people, and we get such a unique platform and ability to help our community and get involved in leadership and advocacy. Like whether you like activism or leadership or STEM or like climate justice, like you'll be able to participate in all of that by being on the board. So yeah, if you're a Bay Area rising junior, I definitely encourage you to apply, and it's a really great opportunity, and it opens a lot of doors for you. You'll get to step out of your comfort zone and develop new skills and work with really cool people.
Thank you so much, Isabella. Next, we have a design challenge that you can complete at home. In this design challenge, you will come face to face with real world scenarios such as saving black rhinos and orangutans. You'll get to see yourself as innovators and change makers in this self-guided sessions. The links to download these design challenges will be shared in a follow-up to this presentation. One more way that you can start right now, yes, I mean right now, in becoming a better steward of our environment is visiting the tech.ecochallenge.org. All right, bring up your windows, visit the tech.ecochallenge.org. Once you create your account, and I'll guide you through the process today, you will see options for logging sustainable actions in a variety of areas to help you start making a difference for our planet in your life, in your home, and your community with the tech. So when you get to the tech.ecochallenge.org, I want you to enter the tech in all lowercase letters. After you do this, you will have the option to join. You'll be guided through a couple of screens where you can enter some background information, such as your name and email address. And then I want you to look for the team that you see here, which has been created just for you. Together, we can log our actions and over a 3-week challenge, see how we collectively build an impact towards a better future for our Earth. And also, don't forget to join us on social media. Follow the Tech Interactive on Instagram and Twitter. Use hashtag YCastOnline and hashtag GenGeo to support the Youth Climate Action Summit and our National Geographic explorers who are joining us. You can also tune in for our next event. If you love the content here, you will also love our next content on April 30th, Designing Apps for Social Change. I want to give a huge thanks to our supporters of the Tech for Global Good program. Without this long list and community of supporters, programs like these would not be possible. I also want to give a big thank you to you. Yes, each and every one of you on this program. Together, we can make a difference for our Earth. And I appreciate you joining us, and we'll see you at the next event.